Hey, welcome back to the Never Iron Anything Comics Review podcast. And welcome to 2023. This week we are tackling a little remembered DC series, but one with, let's call it, a heap of potential, and then we will probably decide whether or not it realised it. I'm joined again on this journey by regular co-host, a man from the land north of the border, which I expect is pretty fucking cold at the moment.
We've got snow and ice on the ground. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, we've got snow and ice on the ground outside.
Is it snow as well, man? Is it?
Well, it was snow at the beginning of the week, and then it melted, and now it's just ice. So it's fun from that side, but not too bad. Not too bad.
Good man.
See, we're used to it, not like you soft Southerners.
I know everyone goes nuts down here. I even bought a new pair of shoes when it snowed. I got all excited. Bought a pair of boots. Yeah.
But no, we're doing all right though. It's new year, new attitude.
Was it a big Hogmanay for you?
No. It's a bit of a fallacy with regard to the Scotland being big on Hogmanay. You know, it's
right.
or it falls into two camps. You're really big on it when you're under 23 because you realise you can just go out in the street and drink as much alcohol as you like.
Yeah.
And then there's a period of where you just don't do anything. It's nice and quiet, and you try
nice
to avoid
days off.
Family and things.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it does sound nice.
Good from that side. Yeah. Mm.
Oh, nice one, man. Yeah, we had a quiet one. Sorry, Adam's just sent me a picture of myself through. He just texted me. That's nice of him. A drawing. See what happens with that. Watch out for a T-shirt soon. Oh God, what do? We just do madness. I told you about a conversation me and him had earlier about a comic strip, just because the term rhymed and it made us laugh.
I'm now wondering if what he sent you is reference material for that, which is a worry. But no, it's that's a teaser for a future episode.
Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah, quite possibly. Now we're talking about something today that is not the 1998 movie based on the Shankill Butchers, starring Stuart Townsend. Although when I saw it on the shelf, I did wonder. Did you want to let us know what we're going to talk about, dude?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Resurrection Man, which is a DC book that came out in May of series. It started in May of 1997. There was a secondary series as well that came out as part of the New 52, but we focused primarily on the first series and specifically looking at the first 5 issues with it.
Yeah, cool. We decided to do 5. It sounds like a weird number, but number 6 is an interruption, isn't it? It comes in as an event.
It's one of the first crossover events that the series gets involved in, yeah.
What is it? Is it New Genesis? Is it called Genesis? I can't remember now.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. I think episode 5, so issue 5, I think would be where the end of the first story arc is anyway. So it works from that sort of perspective.
Yep, good. It's written by DNA, Abnett and Lanning. Art by Jackson / Butch Geis. We've decided on Geis, I think. Depends where you read it, actually, as to whether he's Jackson or Butch. I don't know if you've experienced that. Colours by Carla Feeney. Letters by Ken Lopez. Edited by Eddie Berganza. Eddie Berganza also being the impetus for it coming back under the New 52. 27 issues. The last issue, 26 issues and a DC 1 million issue, which is interesting. That was an interesting time. Now, it has... Did you want to just give a pen picture? I know you've got a comparison that you sent me, haven't you? Yeah.
So the whole purpose is that Resurrection Man is a hero who, every time he dies, he comes back with another power. Okay, that's kind of the summary of it. And it's the story starts off with the fact that he's got amnesia and can't remember who he is. But the way I ended up sort of interpreting it, realizing there's also a bit of a Born Identity start to it there about him waking up, I don't really know who I am. It's then followed with a mix of Highway to Heaven meets Quantum Leap meets Dial H for Hero.
Yes.
You don't actually have a comic view in there as well.
Yeah.
And I quite like the concept of saying, look, the character has different powers almost every issue, because he sort of dies in every issue and then comes back again with a new set of powers.
Yeah.
And that kind of works. And I get that whole thing about saying, this gives us the opportunity to say we can keep putting him in new circumstances, new situations where his new set of powers come to light, and he's able to use them to resolve that bit of the story and move on.
Yeah. Now the powers thing is interesting, and I jumped ahead and read the second series as well, so I will make reference to that as we go along. But it was created by Dan Abnett, Andy Lanning, and Jackson Geiss. First appearance was in issue 1 of this, like you say, May 1997. The character is called Mitch Shelley, and like you said, he resurrects with a new power. Now the story goes that he, when Abnett and Lanning were at Marvel, they pitched a similar series featuring the Great Lakes Avenger character Mr. Immortal, who's a character who can't die or keeps coming back to life again. I'm guessing, you not being a Marvel guy, you wouldn't know the Great Lakes Avengers.
No, it's not what I have in detail. It's,
They're not exactly A-list. Yeah, there was some terrible series about 3 years ago which ended, but I think they were kind of a Byrne creation. It turned up a couple of times, and that didn't really work over there. So they added this sort of loner element and the amnesia element, and the villain's been called the Lab, and they pitched him at DC. What was your first exposure? Let's try a couple of first exposures, but what was your first exposure to this character, Al?
So he also appears in a couple of other crossover events and stuff.
Yeah.
He's not a standout character, so you don't really. I struggled with this book. Let's cut to that in some ways.
Yeah.
And it's because the character and the storyline is quite generic.
Yeah.
And feels like it's, you're right. It's an idea that was somewhere out that they had for something else, and they went, oh well, we could do it with this. And sometimes it feels it's a little bit shoehorned into the DC universe as well.
Yeah.
The fact that he comes across the GLA in action, and I'll talk about that later on.
Yeah.
It's almost like it just happens, and you're like, well, it didn't need to happen. It could have been something else. So I'm going to be honest. I have no recollection of reading this character before at all. Before I get around to this, that's not to say I didn't. It's just I don't recall it, and it's because I say it just kind of melds into it. And as I say, and when I was doing this whole thing about it's like Quantum Leap, where every time he jumps into a new body type, or he jumps into it comes back to a new set of powers.
Yeah.
Which again, as I say, you've seen it done before. You've seen it done with Dial H for Hero, where it's not necessarily the same person, and it's the dial that gets passed round for people to then get their own powers. But every time they dial the H, they get a new set of powers and are a new hero.
Yeah.
So again, it's like I've seen it done.
And that Dial H for Hero went through, because I remember it. I'm going to say in Adventure Comics, I think I first read it, and then it came back in its own series, and was actually a really interesting series, wasn't it?
And so that the concepts that are in here, I'm left going, I've seen it done elsewhere, and there's nothing particularly new or exciting about this yet. And even the underlying story about him being, and spoiler warnings for the listeners, when he gets some of his memory back, it turns out that he's a lawyer for the mob who wanted to get out of that life, but his wife and partner, business partner, turned against him. You're like going, yeah, that's it's almost a Hallmark. This is a Hallmark comic, right?
Yeah, it's a weird mesh of a number of things, isn't it? It really is.
But it's like with the Hallmark movies, you always know what's going to happen. But you're 5 minutes in, and you go, "There's an hour and a half of this to go, and I know exactly how it's going to end."
Yeah.
And there's big chunks of this where I'm like going, "Yeah," and I maybe it's just having read so many comics, but you are reading this going, "I know exactly what's going to happen next." Oh, and the people are going to turn up and fight him. Oh, and here's his the reverse version of him that turns up as well.
Yeah,
and
that's
you're
true.
Going, oh, yeah, of course. It's just that's just another. It's a book of tropes. And
it was kind of
worries me about it.
It was about 5 years after the cancellation of Quantum Leap, I'm going to say. I remember watching Quantum Leap.
It's got no relationship really to Quantum Leap, but
I know what you mean.
It's just that whole thing about it had the opportunity to say every issue could be different.
Yeah.
Because of that, and that's what I meant about
it. It goes for the art, doesn't it? It goes for what I'm guessing at the time was quite trendy. I mean, I think the first time I read it, I thought when I suggested it was the first time I ever read it was when I suggested it to you, and I'll tell you why that is in a minute. But I actually had an issue. I had the Hitman issue, the Hitman crossover,
Right.
and must have read it because I was reading Hitman at the time, but have no memory of reading it. But I ended up being at a comic convention in a shopping centre in Maidstone, and Dan Abnett was there selling, comp copies and stuff like that, and having a chat with people. And I had a chat with him, and he's a nice guy, and I thought I should buy something. And Resurrection Man, there's a couple of books like this where you kind of hear about them, you see them about, and you think, oh, I never read that. It might make a nice series to read, a standalone series. Another one I always think of was Nth Man. Do you remember that? That was a DC book, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I never read that either. I always think, I always see that and think, oh, nice. I'd probably make that quite readable. But I bought it off him, and in the trade, which he signed there and then it sat on my shelf. God, that must have been 10 years ago. And it sat on my shelf, guilting me out. And I keep suggesting it to you. It's something we should do. So I get off my arse and read it. And we finally did it. And we were both, I'm going to say, a little bit underwhelmed by it. Yeah.
I should be clear. You'd originally said that we should read this at Christmas, and I said the Resurrection Man is surely an Easter comic.
Yeah, that's true.
We put it off for a month.
Yeah.
But yeah, the fact that you say it crossed over with Hitman, that again, yes, there's good. I must have read that back in the day because I definitely read, like you, read a lot of Hitman.
Yeah. It's a strange one.
It's a weird one, but it must have done well because it ran for 27 issues.
Yeah,
and was a character they brought back in the 52. So
yeah, it's a weird one, that, isn't it? It's because it's well. Let's get into that. So there's a couple of other questions I'm going to pose to you. So, quickly on the themes you've mentioned, I've made notes that I thought it was like something. It has, for me, it evokes the old Incredible Hulk series or the Invaders, about a sort of loner trying to discover a mystery and wandering through the states. But add to that, you've got this complication that he keeps coming up with various different superpowers, and he keeps getting killed. So it's got that sort of lonely central character thing, which I normally enjoy. I've just finished the Longbow Hunters hardbacks and or rereading them, and he does that. He does like a sort of wander through the states, and I quite enjoy that. Okay, so here's the next one. What was your first exposure to DNA?
So, initially I was thinking, it's their issue of Legends of the Dark Knight, which is I think number 36, or their first issue there,
right?
Because essentially, obviously, we'd certainly getting through all that.
Yeah.
And then I discovered they were actually one of the writing teams on a book that came out in 1991. That I'm pretty sure everybody would have picked up in 1991 in the UK, because they were involved in the Comic Relief comic.
Right, yeah.
Which was an A4 comic produced as
Lenny
part of
Henry
that charity
was
drive that year.
Wasn't he? Yeah.
Lenny Henry was involved, as was Jonathan Ross, both of whom are big comic files.
Yeah, in that, yeah.
So yeah, it's somewhere in my loft, definitely. And if you actually look at the cast of people who are involved in the writing and the art of that, it's pretty much a who's who of British comics at the time, because obviously they've gone as charity comic, So technically that would be my first real exposure to them as the writing couple. So it's Butch Gacy would probably be the Superman storylines, because obviously he was involved in the Death of Superman piece. So couple of years, or the year prior to the start of the Death of Superman, was when I was reading Superman, and that from there on through, and the Return of Superman piece, I'd had a lot of exposure to him that time.
Yeah.
What about yourself? When would you have been in?
So it's a funny one, because I was reading a little bit about both of them, and I remember reading, I'm gonna say Action Force in the early to mid 80s. I'm gonna say, when Dan Abnett was probably just out of university at that point. I read a lot of his Marvel UK stuff, and I think that one of the reasons I got chatting to him, because he's a mate of John Boy Freeman's, and I'm a friend of John's, and we were sort of chatting about John, saying I would say hello to him for me and stuff. And so some of I read an awful lot of his books, so I sort of wrote a little list. So Action Force was notable to me because, for anyone who's a Master of Kung Fu completist, there is a Master of Kung Fu UK produced comic in one of the Action Force issues, just a single issue. He did some stuff for Doctor Who Monthly, which I'm guessing is where he knew John from. The Real Ghostbusters he did. Knights of Pendragon, which was quite a big one for us. Death's Head 2, Battle Tide, and Dark Guard, if you remember that. I don't know if you remember those, man. They were kind of throwaway Marvel UK stuff. And then he did Force Works, which was the series that came out of West Coast Avengers. So basically, West Coast Avengers was this really good Al Milgrom, sort of readable, other Avengers book. And then when the 90s hit, they made it, it went properly 90s, and they did something called Force Works. And then obviously I read stuff like Guardians of the Galaxy and Nova and Realm of Kings, and Judge Anderson and Dredd, and he did Vector 13, and he did the Return of the VCs in 2000 AD, and he did some Ninjak for Valiant. He did some Planet of the Apes for Dark Horse, Aquaman, Superman, Legion, Lost. I think, did you read Legion Lost? It was quite a well thought of book. Yeah, another book that came out with the new 52 as well, didn't it?
Certainly, the Legion storylines kind of tick together with that.
Yeah. And then he did Majestic and the Authority over at Wildstorm. Like I say, he's probably best well known, I would say, outside of comics, for his Warhammer stuff, which he's kind of the governor of, as I understand it. But from a point of view of prose novels. And there's fucking hundreds of those, man. Have you ever been into a Warhammer shop?
There's one just around the corner from my work, actually, and you know what? I'll to people that get involved in that stuff. I don't have the steady enough hand to ever paint Warhammer miniatures because, but no, they had a couple of things in their window, which really they were grips for something to hold the miniatures for while painting.
Oh right, yeah.
To give it, and I was like, oh, I'm really interested in those wee grips. So I was in looking at those, but you're right. You're then left looking around the rest of the shop, going, all right, this is a big thing.
Yeah, massive. Yeah. I mean, my son had a period. He had his sort of Warhammer period, and I used to have to go into the shops with him, and there'd be some game going on the table that I didn't understand, and a sort of an over-enthusiastic, spotty male would ask me what army I had, and stuff like that, and I kind of went, I'm just going to wait outside, son. Leave you to it, But Danny is apparently, and I think Danny Butcher's read some of the books, and he's properly, I think, the governor of it. From the point of view of Andy Lanning, I'm going to say some of the Marvel UK stuff. I think he did. Another one that you probably don't remember is a book called Digitech. Do you remember that? Marvel UK.
You know what? I actually remember the covers.
Yeah,
I can see the logo really well in my head.
Yeah,
it's one of those things that stood out. Yeah,
and I think
couldn't tell you anything about it, but yeah,
John Freeman was the editor of Marvel UK at the time, so there's that connection as well. Jackson, guys, I find him very readable in the most part. I do enjoy his art, and he's one of those blokes that I think maybe like someone like Deodato, early Deodato, I sort of took for granted. But if you compare him to some of the artists these days, he's actually a bit of a superstar, in my opinion. He knows what he's doing. There's a lot of photorealism in some of the stuff he does in this book. But
yes,
there's a couple of faces you think, I think I know who that is, Yeah. But yeah, so he was born in 1961 in Chattanooga, Tennessee. That's the only reason I said that, to say the word. His first work, so this is where I originally saw him, was in Crusaders issue 1 in November 1982. One of the Red Circle books, and I have that. I remember buying that in the comic shop. But he had previously ghosted for Pat Broderick on a ROM annual, which I also own. So I'm guessing that would have been the first time I'd actually seen his art without realising it. After that, Al Milgrom, who was the art editor at Marvel at the time, gave him a shot on the Micronauts, and he did X-Men and the Micronauts miniseries, which was really good, like a really good series. 1984, he did the Indiana Jones run. I think I was probably a little bit disappointed with him, because I think prior to that they'd had Byrne on Indiana Jones, and I was like, I was sort of a rapacious, crazy Byrne fan. And then he did some of that. He inked some Dazzler. He did X Factor and New Mutants. Like you say, he went over to, he did DC, did Action Adventure Comics. He did Flash Volume 2, issue 1 to 9, which was the Mike Baron, Wally West series, which I've really enjoyed. Mike Baron kind of reworked the Flash at that point, didn't he? Post Crisis. Yes. That's pretty good. The Marvel Comics, he's done, you name it, he's done it. Captain America, Black Panther, Spider-Man, Avengers, Iron Man, New Mutants, Secret Avengers, Sword of the Swashbucklers, if you remember that, which I think was an epic series off the top of my head. At Dark Horse, he did some Aliens, Predator, Deadliest of the Species. At Valiant, he did quite a lot. Did Bloodshot, Eternal Warrior, Ninjak, Turok, and Exo Manowar, all books that I was reading. And then he was part of the Ruse guys, the cross-gen guys, and he did Ruse. Were you a follower of the cross-gen stuff, man?
No, is the short answer to that.
Yeah.
It was part of the big explosion of so many new books, and you could only afford so much at the time. And I left cross-gen behind.
I think Ruse,
Valiant and all that were at that point.
I think Ruse and Route 666 were the only two books I read out of that. But I remember Ruse being, it's a Mark Waid written book off the top of my head, which is kind of a Sherlock Holmes thing. Pretty good. Pretty darn good. And CrossGen had that weird thing where everyone went and lived in Florida, was it, I think? And they all worked in the same building and stuff. And sort of it shone brightly for a while and then soon went bust. He did
like so many companies at that point in time. Yeah.
And at this point in time. Yeah. Also, he did the classic and famous Sliders Special Narcotica out of Acclaim Comics, which is just weird. I think that was written by a member of the cast.
You would have in your collection, definitely. So.
I do so, yeah. And he did IDW. He did Winterworld, which is a cracking book, and it came back for a sequel, the second one. Chuck Dixon, is it? I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, it's very good.
Yeah.
Look,
he's another one of these. You're right about he's easily forgettable because he's really clean, simple styles of. Yeah. He's another one of these journeymen, right? And
I dig those guys, man. I dig them.
When we've talked about people like Aparo and things like that in the past, we're really going, you know what? Yeah, these are the shoulders that the people stand on to produce comics, because they're producing good comics that are readable and this is a perfectly good readable comic, and there's and the art is. It's a little bit 90s.
It has its moments, and it has a couple of pages you think, "Ooh, really?" Yeah, but I think some of it's very good.
So all of that, as I say, to me, it was just that I found the storyline just to be a bit odd or a bit generic, and the pacing of it is really odd in terms of nothing happens for a couple of issues, and then suddenly, woof, it goes off, and you're like, "And that's fine if you're reading it as it was fine because I was sitting and reading." Issue after issue, back to back. But I imagine if I was reading this monthly, there would be certain months where I would have been, well, that was what happened there.
Yeah, who were they? Yeah, there's a couple of sort of strange. We'll get into a couple of the stranger moments in a minute, but it's a strange one. So there's a couple of questions I'm going to pose to you. First off, is this, or should it, or could it have been a Vertigo series? Do you think it's a mistake including it in the general and wider DC universe? Because they are at fucking pains to do that in this first series, aren't they? Well, you've got a character that's pseudo-religious. The opening page of this could easily be the first page of a Vertigo book to me. Someone who's got that Jesus and angel thing going on it. What do you think?
So, if it had been a Vertigo book, yes, they could have played more. They could have played more on the death side of it.
Yeah.
And the fact that he gets some, because the powers that he gets are not necessarily always that superhero spandexy power type things. It's despite the fact in issue 5 he looks a lot like the Thing. So it could have easily been much more hard edged and much more hard hitting had it been into Vertigo, and therefore been more that side of going, he is in the dark underside of traveling America and riding the rails as a hobo, because you could have played that
could really gone off on themes and images and
combined with the fact that the way they shoehorn in the DCU in issue 2, he happens to come across a fight that the JLA is having with another bad guy, right? And it's the fact that he can use some of his powers to rescue some of the people who are just standing around the edges, while buildings.
That's what my note says. He sort of runs around in the background a bit during this fight.
But the way that they deal with the JLA is, again, they just play on all of the really simple tropes.
Yeah.
So doesn't help that it's there's a very good way to date the book because it's the electric blue Superman,
Yeah, yeah,
um,
straight in your face
which
there,
they
isn't it?
kind of
Yeah, yeah,
just throw away with that. But then they use Wonder Woman's there, but they use it as all visual and no dialogue because she's a woman, so they don't know what she's going to say. So they're, they clearly have gone, well, we'll just make her there to be, look pretty.
yeah,
They use the Flash as a whipping boy, which
yeah,
again is a very easy trope because it's that whole, oh look, he's broken his leg, but don't worry, he's got super speed healing, so he's back up and running again really quickly. And you're like, yeah, okay. And then they go, oh look, the most powerful person here is the Green Lantern, but he's a bit thick, a bit dumb. So we'll, he'll make
yeah.
the wrong thing out
So
of
it's
these,
the
and you're like
it's the
going,
Kyle Rayner, isn't it? So
yeah, but the way they just you're like going, right, this is the notes that you write out when you go, oh, I'm going to write, I'm going to include the GLA. What we're going to do? Well, let's make sure we have Supes, Wonder Woman, Flash, and GLA there. Oh, we'll make Flash run around and get hurt. Make Green Lantern do something stupid, and don't know what we'll do with Wonder Woman, but just make her there so that
yeah,
we know we're like powerful woman shoehorned in. I just feel that you're like going, that scene was not needed.
yeah,
And your point about saying if it was a Vertigo book, they would never have even considered putting it in there. You could equally have done, in a Vertigo sense, going, yeah, look, there's some form of natural disaster, or something happens that's causing a building to collapse, and he uses his powers to either, what's the film about the guy with the train wreck, and he's got powers and he saves people.
Oh, the Bruce Willis
it could have
Unbreakable,
been,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
it could have been it could have been that, and you wouldn't have, you would have got over what, the fact that he's finding that he's got powers and that he
yeah.
can do things with them,
It's
and
an
he would have just
interesting
got that
one
bit of the story over.
because
Yeah.
and I'll mention it now, but Series 2, which is the new 52 one, which comes back and has 12 issues and a 0 issue. It finishes on the 0 issue. That really, I sent you some pictures the other day, didn't I? This week, that really leans into the angels and hell. So he is the character he is in this. They completely reboot the story again, but because he can't die and is keep being resurrected, due to, they give a technical reason. Is it called techites or something like that? It's a bit like the stuff that's allegedly in Jedi's blood or whatever it is, But he's been sort of part of an experiment. He's been a bad guy who's sort of saved his life by being part of the experiment. So angels from heaven are coming down to take him, and demons from hell are coming around to take him as well. So there's a battle between heaven and hell, and he's the character of this, straight out of a Moorcock book, and he's the character in the middle of it. Now that's basically like fucking the first 5 years of Vertigo is Moorcock, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was reading and thinking it must be Eddie Berganza who liked it because he edited the original series and this series. It must be him wanting it back, because to me at that point Vertigo was struggling and really in need of a hit, and they could have used this because it would have been a great Vertigo series, and the level of sales, as I understand it, in Vertigo was a lot lower for cancellation reasons, But yeah, it was a cracking. It was I really really enjoyed series 2 compared to this, and I think one of the reasons, like you say, there is one of the reasons that it doesn't quite knit together as a narrative story is because it keeps being fucking interrupted with things. Like we really didn't need that Justice League episode issue, It's not needed. Yeah.
All such DC series will, or any
Marvel do the same. They throw Spider-Man
well.
and Wolverine into issue 2 all the time,
And it's how do we tie it into the universe? How do we get people to buy? The completists have got to get.
Yeah. Well, let me just while we're looking at those 2 issues, man. If you've got the first issue, if you can have a look at pages 2 and 3 of the first issue, and then go into the JLA, the second issue. So if you just clap your eyes on that double page spread 2 and 3 in the first issue, now go to the pages after the Green Lantern appearance in issue 2. It's the same layout pretty much, because I think they're using visual continuity. They're either using it cheaply and he's just reusing a layout, or they're being clever and using a visual continuity to provide the mental flashbacks that he's having.
if it's clever, it's too clever. It was too clever for me.
Yeah, I think so. I
Um,
think it's too clever for the comic. Yeah, yeah. It's a weird one, isn't it? It's just I literally
yeah.
didn't think of it until I just because I read this in digital. I think you're reading it in digital, aren't you?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
read it in
Mhm.
digital, and then I dug the trade off the shelf yesterday to sort of have another look at it, and I thought, oh, that's the fucking same.
Mm.
You know.
Yeah, unless yeah, they don't do enough of the repetition for you to then start spotting other bits of repetition. So
Yeah.
no, I think that's, and again, it's maybe is it just that that's the well, this is the standard way to just sort of lay out that page, and there's
It's very 90s as well. You know, it's sort
yeah,
of yeah, it's an interesting one.
yeah,
From the sort of religious aspect, I actually find that more of a draw. I think it might be just my Catholic boy, Catholic schoolboy upbringing, and also the fact that I quite like Vertigo. That I quite like religious iconography in comics like this, and I think if you go to page one of the comic, issue one, page one,
yeah,
that's
that
fucking crucifixion starts.
exactly.
You know, and I wish
And
they'd
that's
stayed with that visual imagery. He looks great on page one. That's a
and
good look to him. You know.
and there's a whole thing with that as well where you're right that was my thing as well. I thought this was going to be initially when I started going through the one I thought the Highway to Heaven
Yeah.
mix that was doing there, which is the whole thing of, oh yeah, is he really just some sort of fallen angel, but he wants to get, he has to do enough things to gain his wings,
Yeah.
and then he'll go through. And I wondered if that's where it was going to go. Um,
I think
but
sometimes
yeah,
titles in comics can be quite misleading. Like you say, Resurrection Man. You know the
but
covers
it
of
doesn't.
this,
Yeah,
and
you don't really see him go through the resurrection either
it's
at
also
any
very
point.
on the
Yeah.
nose. You know, it's not surrounded by the depth that I would have perhaps liked to have or personally would have put into it of having a resurrection of a man. Series
Mm.
two goes into it more because it's all about Christian sort of mythology. And they name the
I mean,
angels. The angels turn
yeah,
up with swords. This sort of thing.
they and is it just that the first story arc in the first series was written generically to be either a Marvel storyline or a
Yeah,
DC
maybe.
storyline,
Yeah, it could be.
and therefore it's like, well, for the first bit we can, because the the DC universe has always had the bigger links to the afterlife and the than the Marvel universe
Yeah,
has, and
especially with stuff like Constantine and yeah,
Constantine, exactly, and and even the links through things like Swamp Thing and that, which
yeah,
it's
yeah,
the pre-Vertigo titles were that were DC titles that moved into there was always that sort of linkage there, so I could see why it would sit with that, and therefore that's why Marvel probably turned it down. It came over here, yeah, makes some sense. I do just feel though that the first set of storylines then could have been written, the fact that he meets the JLA, he could equally have met the Avengers. He could
yeah.
equally have met the the Valiant team of equivalents. He could have gone and met the Crusaders, if you want
Yeah,
to put him
I
into
mean,
that
to be
that
fair, he
part of the
does.
world.
They do the same in Volume Two. He meets the Suicide Squad in issue
Right.
six. So yeah, yeah,
Well, my point is that you could this could be anything. This could be in any universe.
I feel like it's an
There's
editorial
nothing
mandate as opposed
specialized.
to a writerly, decision. It's got to be surely, with a,
Oh
if
yeah,
you're crossing the JLO into your comic, you can't just write it and submit it to the editor. I'm guessing it's got to be like at least a discussion and likely a suggestion. And I suppose a writer will do it. It will be happy to do it. Same as Marvel when you get Wolverine in every issue too for a while.
mm,
It's going to bump sales.
yeah.
It's going to keep the issues going.
But look, we're doing this down, and it's which is
Yes, it's not terrible. There's a lot worse comics, man.
it's not
I just
there
showed you
are
two comics before
oh, sorry.
we started recording that were fucking terrible. This is
Yeah.
this is readable. It's readable pulp to me.
Yes.
It should be more
I
pulpy in my head.
and if I was just picking it, if it was just part of the monthly reading pile, I probably would have been fine with it and just gone, yeah, fine. It's none, but it's nor is it anything particularly memorable, that it's going to memorable, nor is it something I would say, oh, I'm going to go back and read more of it. Nor am I really encouraged to read the rest of the 27 issues, and it's
Yeah,
it's just it's just standard. It's just a standard comic, which sounds really bad, but
Yeah,
actually is really good. Because that's like saying, oh, it's a Coronation Street. It's a soap opera version of the comic. That's all it is, and it's
yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that. It's part of the overall mix. And there'll be bits of the audience reading it who go, "This is the level I'm at, therefore this is what I want to read," and
Mm.
it's fine for them. Um, I
I
would
do.
have liked more, and I do think some of it's quite lazy written.
Yeah, I agree. I think series two benefits from decompression. Actually, it's rarely that I say that, but
Mm.
it benefits from a coherent issue to issue series. Well, we didn't have to have Batman appear or Hitman appear like the JLA, but it is decompressed, and because of that, it becomes oh, when's next issue kind of thing. I think what it does well, that it does well again in volume two, is the body double characters are cracking villains, the two
Yeah.
ladies, and it doesn't really explore them much because there's basically it's like an 80s TV series. The villains in it who are kind of like mercenaries. There's more to them than that, but they're kind of mercenaries who are hunting him down. One's a sort of sexy blonde and one's a sexy brunette. They've always got rocket launchers and Uzis and stuff on them. Yeah, and I thought this is just so 90s comics, but they're
Yeah.
drawn well. It's not as if Liefeld or someone's got hold of them. They're actually drawn well. you know
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Mm.
let
Anyway,
me
that's yeah.
okay, well, let me pose some devil's advocates questions to you.
Yeah.
Why didn't it last? Now, there's a lot worse comics out there at the time, a lot worse written, a lot worse drawn, a lot less comics that just don't hold together. Why do you think it didn't work from us? I know it's 27 issues, but I kind of feel like 27 issues is comparable to maybe 10 issues now. You know, why?
Um,
And it took so
there's
long for it to
nothing
come back.
special about it.
Right. Okay.
So
Yeah, that's a
I
good
don't
point.
think I don't think there's anything really stand out in it. And therefore you're left going, where do you go next with some of these storylines as well? And what do you do with it? Therefore, it's very easy to kind of go, yeah, he's just a background character.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe that's the thing. It's a case of, yeah, he's the sort of person, once you got through that main storyline of trying to resolve the fact that he was um, a lawyer for the mob,
Yeah.
you just kind of go, he's just a background character that you can bring in and out. And every now and again, you go, oh, there he is. When was the last time he was killed? What's his current powers?
Yeah.
Oh, we can use that to fill whatever story hole. And that's kind of it. Or alternatively, the stories that are getting told against this character could be told against other characters.
Yeah.
Therefore, and sometimes I think that they have to go with it. Right, we've got a story that can be fulfilled by different characters or different slightly angles. Pick one and go with it.
Yeah.
And they probably just went, well, we'll just not. This one isn't for it. However, why was it brought back? The thing there is because it fits into any, particularly with New 52, where they had to, let's identify 52
I
titles
know. Yeah. Yeah.
and have one that can fit a slot where we're just saying, yeah, it's a character where it's pretty easy to describe the background, it's pretty easy to describe how he gets the powers and runs with them and all this sort of stuff, and we can do things issue to issue. Let's go with it. And all of the New 52 stuff, they knew exactly that they'd written out the first story arc for 12 issues, knowing that they were going to
A lot
cancel
wouldn't
half of them at the
survive.
end of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And they were like saying, so if you got an easy out, you're out. Um, and I think it was just one of those ones where they went, well, we had an idea for it. Let's run it with the second storyline. If it takes off, it takes off. If not, well, no harm, no foul.
Yeah. And it can easily be
Um,
told on its own. Yeah, it doesn't
yeah,
necessarily at that point. They weren't really crossing over stuff, were they, in the early 52?
yeah,
I think for me it suffers from a non-iconic character. So I think the first series did get some advertising, from what I can see. There was,
mm,
Resurrection Man's coming, and there was a couple of in-house ads, and I think it was DC Currents, whatever it was at the time, featured it. But I think if they'd have stuck with that man with the long white hair, black jacket, black jeans, whatever it was, blue jeans, boots, wandering the countryside, I think it would have stuck better. But as you progress along the series, the central character changes his appearance completely. I mean, part of it's due
mm,
to the resurrection thing, where he comes back and he loses his hair and stuff. But it's comics; you can get around that. I think they
Yeah.
needed that central image, and it just wasn't there. So you were picking up, even a lot of the issue covers don't even feature the character on them.
No, I was going to say that the cover suite is rubbish.
Yeah,
It really is. I really don't like it at all. Or none of them would, if that's all you saw, you would go, oh, yeah, I must pick that up off the shelf. And it suffers quite early on as well
yeah,
with pick up, meets Hitman, fine, I'm buying it because Hitman's on the cover. Oh, it meets Supergirl, fine, I'm buying it because it's got Supergirl on the cover. Um, are people really just buying it because it is the the crossover book?
yeah. And it's certainly issue 7 says that you don't even know who Batman's talking to in that. It's a sort of shadowy
Mm,
figure, and like you say, the Hitman covers the same. Both of those Hitman covers the same because you don't see the character. They're
yeah.
obviously relying, and then issue 14 is just the body doubles on the cover.
That's almost another way they could have taken the storyline that would actually made it more interesting. And last time we talked about Brave and the Bold.
Yeah,
It could almost have been the crossover book where you
yeah,
go, the actual theme is the core character going from one superhero to the next, to the next, to the next,
yeah.
and you've always got and
Well,
he
funny you should
isn't
say
the
that,
important,
because the character, the powers that he inherits in the second series are related to the people who kill him, or who are present when he's killed, or the way in which he's killed.
right,
So there's a thematic continuity
yeah,
to the powers that he gets from each one, which is quite interesting. So if he drowns, he might inherit the power to become water and slide under cell
mm,
doors and stuff like that. There's that thematic thing to it. Whilst this in it's so fucking random.
yeah,
You don't really know. Like, it just seems like, especially that thing that looks like the cross between Hellboy and the Thing. It's so it's so out of the visual acceptance of what you have for Resurrection Man, and then they fucking put it on the cover, and I must have looked at them on the shelf and think, I ain't got a clue what's going on there. I'll skip that one. Yeah, it's almost like that. I
yeah.
think. Yeah.
But
I mean, I feel like it works as a comic compared to the other nonsense that was going on elsewhere in the comics world. It's not the worst comic that was on the shelves by any stretch, But there was, I almost feel like it's the Doom Patrol effect in this, where there's some really wacky moments in it, to me, I feel like DNA were looking at Vertigo, and like the stuff like the body doubles, the stuff like the opposite, is he called the Hooker, who's like the sort of
yeah,
the sort of dark version of him. You've got the stuff that he comes home, so his wife thinks he's died. He comes home, and his wife is having sex with his mate called Richard, who's cosplaying as a fat superhero, who's like the character that's on the posters for the local soda company, and that's
yes.
straight out of
Which
some kind of
which is the
Animal
fact
Man
the
issue.
soda company though is called the soda company. It's
Yeah,
the soda bottling plant, and you're like, really? I mean, again, it's just like these are the notes you made when you were writing this, and you go, I'll go back later to give that a proper name.
yeah,
No,
yeah.
never did.
Did you send the
Um,
wrong version of scripted? And it's like it's only made slightly different by the way they misspell soda. It's like,
yeah,
yeah, and that whole sort of is long before cosplay, but the sort of sexy cosplay, fat bloke in a costume who is double crossing his mate and having sex with his missus, and he sort of the Resurrection Man interrupts this sort of kinky sex thing they're about to get going on. And I'm thinking this should have
try to
been a
think
Vertigo book.
when did the Simpsons first do Duffman? Because
Yes,
that's kind of
yeah,
what it's the equivalent of him being dressed up as Duffman, but he doesn't quite. But looks more has the body shape of Homer rather than
yeah,
Duffman. But
yeah,
yeah,
and
there's some great ideas
yeah, yeah,
that, but they are ideas you've seen else. A lot of them you've seen elsewhere, and they just shoehorn them in together, and it just doesn't blast off into what it could have been. And that's where the Vertigo options would have been one way to do it, and say, yeah, let's get much more deep and dark with regard to the whole death and
yeah.
gaining the powers to
You got
improve
PTSD,
stuff
anger,
through
or the guy who
the
keeps being
element.
killed. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Or you could have done the whole, as I say, he's the traveling thing that connects the whole DCU together, and therefore he keeps meeting different elements of it, but then his actual storyline gets kind of lost in that.
Yeah,
But,
and they sort of use expositionally like little tricks just to move the story along. I think page 6 I wrote down. At one point he just goes, "Oh, a chunk of memory just came back to me." It just seems like superly, convenient that just because we needed to move the story along a bit, he suddenly remembers a bit. And also there's obviously the elephant in the room that we discussed before we started recording is the fact that he looks exactly like the current Frank Miller. For big chunks of it with the hat on and everything. Yeah.
Well, there's bits of that, and then there's one of the background characters in issue 1, where the background character is Frank Miller in a hat. I'm sorry, definitely.
Yeah.
On page 17, if you happen to have it in front.
Yeah, I've got it here. Yeah.
But if the listeners are going through the app at the same time.
Also, just if you could have another look at a page for me. So if you go to the Justice League issue 2, you've got the double page splash of Blue Superman. Turn to the next page. You've got 3 panels along the bottom of the page there. That middle panel, it just looks like a Cubert has drawn that. It's just some of it is lovely. I love that panel. The way that I think the thing is that Mr. Geese does well is he does do layouts well in this. There's a lot of nice layouts, and he's not being lazy and just doing double page spreads. If he does do a double page spread, there's always like indented panels and stuff like that going on. Yeah.
Well, here's the weird thing about those pages. So it's describe the piece to the listener. So it's a full page, if you like, and then with 3 panels, a 3-panel strip along the bottom.
Yeah.
And the big panel at the top of each of the pages, which bleeds around the 3 panels, is the Justice League fight with generic 90s baddie.
Yeah.
Right? So this is the wrong way round.
Yeah.
The big flashy bit is the side story, and his story is just the wee 3 panels at the bottom. And you're like, what's the important bit of the page? Surely the important bit should be his story, not the other, rather than the Justice League. But it's almost like too much emphasis is given to the Justice League side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's just it would be interesting to ask Mr. Abnett or Mr. Lanning about it. About if it was just like constant interruptions and editorial stuff, and then maybe that's the reason why Mr. Berganza brought it back, is he kind of thought we didn't get a good enough run at that. That has potential. Couple of good writers, gentlemen, both are very prolific. Both have produced some excellent work. Let's give them another shot at it. And the second series is much better, although albeit only 13 issues.
Yeah. And don't worry, if you on that same issue with the jail, if you go to page 12,
okay,
which is the double page spread where he does get a flashback of some of his memory while he's going through, and this is the thing they could have played with the Vertigo piece, it's while you're going through a death scene. You get he only gets the flashbacks while he's dying.
Yeah, so he gets the memories back that he needs. Yeah.
So you could have had a Vertigo piece where he goes, if he wants to learn more, does he commit suicide?
Yeah.
Because he knows he'll be resurrected, but and he's doing, so you could have done things like that with it. That would have been, again, that's a Vertigo storyline, not a DCU storyline.
There's a great novel series called the Riverworld Saga by Philip Jose Farmer. Have you ever heard of that? And the central character is everyone's basically born. I won't bore you with it. Everyone's born who's ever existed, and the only way you can travel up and down this river is by killing yourself.
Right.
And so Sam Clemens is the reincarnated Sam Clemens, who's the central character, and he's figured out a way to kill himself just so he can travel up and down this river. And it's similar to that, that he needs to discover his past, so he commits suicide. But how dark is that?
Yeah.
But it's an interesting story. I'd read that. Yeah. Well, it was. I feel a bit bad for making you read it now because I've been.
No.
It's sat on the shelf.
You never know.
Yeah, exactly.
You never know.
Yeah.
I say one of the things that did lead me to have a wee think about was, okay, they're not working together anymore, Aaron Atlantic, but writing partnerships is a weird thing in comics.
Yeah.
Because I think, we talk about creative partnerships in comics a lot, and we can all rattle off who our favorite writer-artist combos are.
Yeah.
But it's relatively unusual to have 2 writers who work together but with multiple different artists.
Yeah.
Wagner and Grant is obviously the one that'll jump to everybody's thoughts immediately with regard to that.
Yeah.
A couple of other ones I'd written down was Moore and Repium.
Yeah. So Liam Moore, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Giffen and DeMatteis.
Yeah.
They work, and again, you could argue Giffen's an artist, but they work together. And then the other one I'd written down, which is again a bit ropier in terms of the connection of it, was Aragones and Evander.
Yeah.
Because they do writing together, as you know.
And then he goes away and draws.
Aragones then goes and draws it as well, but yeah, it's just because I'm never sure.
Yeah.
With writing partnerships, who does what?
Yeah,
is one plotting and one dialogue, or is it?
Well, I had a little insight into this recently, and I know you brought that up. So I've been sort of racking my brains while we've been talking to think about some other ones. And I mean, there's Stan and Roy, Stanley and Roy Thomas, and you know, I kind of feel like it's Stan going, go and write a Grey Gargoyle story. That'll do, Roy. You know, it's got the extent of their drawing. But one of the ones that really popped in my mind was Pat Mills and Tony Skinner, who did stuff like Accident Man, Punisher 2099, and I've had this from Pat himself, because Pat's always going to me, "You got to meet him, Tony. You got to meet Tony, you know, because he's you'd like him, you know." And Tony has certain interests, for example, in weapons. So a lot of the weapons stuff was written by him, and a lot of the sort of I don't know what you call it, sort of alternative religions like Satanism and stuff. Pat was telling me that Tony Skinner's got a knowledge of that, and I think that's how they divvied up the writing on that.
Right.
And I know it's not quite comics, but you know, good old Kevin O'Neill, him and Pat wrote those serial killer books together, and they would meet and like rough notes out, and then sort of swap pages back and forward would be how you did it. But you're right, man, there's very few out there. The only other one I came up with just off the top of my head, I'm sure there'd be loads of others, was Bendis and Hickman when they were doing Secret Warriors. But that was very much, I think, Bendis going, I recognise this man as being a good writer. I'm going to write with him for the first few, you know, now that he's a Marvel, get him in the door, and then I'll sort of send him off and running, which I think is what happened there. And that does, I think Bendis is very good like that. He did the same with Matt Fraction and a couple of others. But yeah, there's the here and there, aren't they? But they don't seem to.
But yeah, it's an interesting, as I say, because again, the dynamic of it. Well, when you're a writer-artist combo, you've got that. You've got something. I've got an idea. Oh,
you've got delineation of responsibilities. Yeah,
but not you can see one idea sparks another and sparks, you know. Oh, now that I've seen what you've drawn, I've got a new idea of how we can take this. And here's, you know, and yeah, but. It was just a fascinating thing to me when I was doing some research on this.
There'll be loads of others. People will be texting
screaming at their their iPhones at the moment, or whatever device they're using.
I did it today with Falpy. So Falpy and I, the way that we come up with stories is we either go on a journey or we phone each other, and then we try and make each other laugh, and then that turns into the idea for a comic. So we're currently working on This Is a Banana, which comes from a ridiculous conversation. And my labia looks like Australia, which we liked because it rhymed. But yeah, so that's kind of how we write stuff. And then I take a couple of weeks to months or whatever to write the script. Then I send it to him, and then he'll draw it. So we do kind of come up with concepts, which is different, isn't it? I suppose. Yeah, the coming up with concepts thing. Is more common, maybe. You know. Yeah.
Anyway, it's an interesting one for.
Yeah, good stuff, man. Yeah, look, you said to me, you messaged me today saying, I'm not sure I've got much to talk about this, and we've already done 55 minutes on it, but there you go.
I was going to say, and people can send us on the back of a postcard, other writers that work together. Right?
No prizes. Yeah. Yeah, good stuff, man. So what's going on in the world of Mr. Henderson? What's happening? Oh, no, I can't write your first name down as Alan anymore. I'll tell you this, I've got to write Alan. Because if I write it down, it looks a bit like AI. And I'll get attacked.
And I did send you a video saying that
you did. Yeah, you proved it. You said, "Oh, it's all right." Yeah, it's okay. Here we
go. Which led both of us to go and listen to Graceland.
I know, with such hips. No, what were they called? People who listened to that. It was all the bankers and stuff like that, wasn't it? What were they called in the 80s? Oh, fucking hell.
Yuppies.
Yuppies. Yeah, that was like allegedly like a yuppie album, wasn't it? Graceland. Paul Simon. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it should be viewed in that way, because it's not. But I remember
I listened to it at the time, and I would have been a teenager, so that's
yeah.
And I can assure you, my family was not in that tax bracket.
Such a yuppie.
But
Yeah, with your mobile
so
phone.
no, thanks for me. I had a little bit of a creative spark a few weeks back
Oh,
because I was
nice.
asked to participate in. There's a new role-playing game magazine coming out this year.
Cool.
That's going to be going out on a quarterly basis, and they are looking for a three-panel comic strip in that. So I've provided them basically what it's a quarterly magazine, so they've got their year ahead of them sorted in terms of um, their
Content
three
from
panel
you.
strips.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's actually left me to go. I've actually now got a wee sort of character set there, and a new strip which is called "It's My Party," with
Ah, nice.
a sort of from a D&D, a stroke, other role playing game elements of people who can follow on for that. So
Oh,
that
nice.
was a kicker for that, and so I'll help promote their Kickstarter when they get around to
Oh,
launching
let
the
us know, man. Yeah,
magazine
we'll give it a
in a
big shout.
month's
Yeah,
time or
yeah.
so.
Yeah, that's nice.
Um,
I actually find when I get challenged, it sort of it creatively helps in a way. You know, if someone says to
yes.
me, "Oh, we really need you to write a story," you know, that's going to be 7.5 pages long, and oh, okay, suddenly I come up with
Mm.
an idea. But if I'm sort of sat there on my own thinking, "Oh, what should I do?" It doesn't tend to come so quickly. But yeah, that's nice then, man. So not penguins or anything like that. It's a completely
No,
new set of characters. Yeah.
it's as I say, it's but mainly it's a sort of D&D party that's set off to do something, and but there's also mech related role playing game people in it as well. Especially some of the feedback they gave me from an editorial perspective was to make sure that I included a female character and stuff because I hadn't in some of the first
Okay.
samples I gave them.
Yeah.
And it was actually very interesting to get proper editorial feedback, including rejecting one of the strips that I did.
Ah, look at you. Yeah, yeah.
And
You got to take it on the chin,
that in
man, haven't you?
itself,
Yeah.
well, yeah, no, because the reasoning was perfectly sound. Yeah, I'm left going, I'm still a funny guy.
Oh, you can always
But
use it somewhere else.
yeah,
Rework it. Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, you know what? I'll do the gag here because it's not that funny. It's a case of I'm old enough to remember when all I could afford was Dungeons or Dragons.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I get you.
anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
that they rejected that for various reasons. So that's that, which has left me to get a little bit restarted with Penguin
Cool.
and doing some more of those. But let me just slowly plod along. And
Yeah.
then you and I are both waiting with bated breath with regards
Oh,
to our
Eamon, what's
submissions
happening?
to a recent
Yeah.
charity comic where as to whether or not
It's
our
making us
ideas are
wait,
good
isn't he?
enough. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Eamon's busy
I just
taking.
think,
For those who don't know, so DUI 3 is on the blocks. Eamon is editing issue 3, as he did issue 2. He's currently taking submissions for up to 5 pages. From stories and see if there's any artists. He might match some artists, or they might come as a pairing, or stuff like that. It's very much let's see what we get in and see who's about and see who wants to do what, because everyone's working for free. And the charity has just been announced. So the first year was what was the first year again? Refuge. It was, yeah, of course it was. It was Refuge when Sarah Harris did it. Issue 2 was Cancer Research UK, and issue 3 has just been announced as being Mind, the mental health charity. He ran a little sort of vote on the Slack and into the emails into him, and that was I think it was a close run thing, but it won out in the end with Mind, and I think Mind's a great little charity. It's good that we're going to raise. I think both issues have both raised around £1,000 for the charity,
yeah,
which is nice.
yeah,
So
it's
that's
amazing.
we've both got pitches in, waiting for Eamon to decide. Look at him being the governor now. So he's the governor. So we'll see what happens on that. You got any other work ongoing or?
No, not ongoing. No.
Yeah.
So as I say, it's just chipping away with Penguin stuff to try and get some more of that. As I slowly but surely work towards the end of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Almost
Hopefully
there,
get
man.
there eventually.
Yeah, cool.
But
Yeah. So from our point of view over at Tribute, we've got Dirty Basement 2 is in the works at the moment. We've got a few little guests on it. I just had a phone call which I missed from someone who else is doing it with us. So a couple of new names involved in it. That's going to be fun. Me and Adam are sort of working away on that. Adam's got a new Patreon, which is just him. He's just got a comic out, which I think you can buy, but he's putting loads of work on the Patreon. Actually, it's really good. It's really looking good. Let me just get you off. I just want to make sure I got the right name of it, which because it only just arrived. It's called Laundrette Comics, because he's having to go to the laundrette and he drew it in the laundrette, and it's a little mini comic that came out today. So go and find a copy of that from Adam's website. Only other thing I suppose I can mention is I'm on Glem next week, so that should be quite good. If you go to, I'll get you the name of the stall I'll be at. So mostly I'm sort of wandering free, which is quite nice at these things. But I'll be at, I think it's called Crower.
So if you're going to do that, I hope you're really wearing a kilt. So when you're, because wandering free sounds like you're. Never mind.
You know,
I've put an image in everybody's.
Carrying up the Kyber. Yeah, Crower Funding is the name of the guy, and he's got a shop in France, a micro library, and he's got a shop in Lille in France. And I'll be doing. I think I'm doing a Atomic Hercules signing at his table. So if anyone listening to this is at Angoulême, message me and we'll have a coffee or something. But I can't wait, man. It's my second trip. Obviously I went just before lockdown, like literally weeks before lockdown. Me and Sam went, and then we're back again for No Brow. It's Thursday, Friday, Saturday next week, so I'm very excited by that. Had you done Angoulême? I can't remember what you said to me now.
No.
I think you'd love it, man.
Yeah. As you say, it's a bit arranging to get there, and I know you've got you're in with your Airbnb. That's,
the lady. Yeah, she's clearly got a thing for me, but you can't blame her. So she's very nice. She picks us up from the train station, all that sort of thing. So that's quite nice. And Sam knows everywhere. You know, he knows everyone and everywhere. So we sort of wander around from meal to meal. I think we blagged a couple of free meals out of Delcor and all these sort of people last year. I sat there. Sam thought it was funny to tell everyone I was his bodyguard. He thought that was hilarious. Mate, it's a dream, that event.
Well, it makes a change from you're the bodyguard rather than you going around and saying that Adam's your rent boy. So
or when the time me and Cliff were saying that we were his gay dads. You can see us as his dads. I think that's right. I think we make quite a handsome couple.
And you wonder why people like Johnny Cannon and I don't like travelling to places like Nottingham with you.
He's just messaged me. He just sent me a message, Mr. Cannon. I look forward to speak to him soon. Yeah, so busy times, man. Thanks for that. We shall say goodbye in a second. But where can people find you, man?
You can either find me by searching for Penned Gwyn on any form of social media, or look for @Shadow1972 if you're still on Twitter.
I've still got an account, put it that way. Still got the pod account. I occasionally stop myself from scrolling through that nonsense. But yeah, good stuff, man. Go and buy some Penguin. Yeah, definitely. You can find me, hopefully you might be listening to this through neverrunanything.com, so have a look at that. The ACP, we are coming up to the 400th episode very soon, so it's quite exciting. We just did an episode on AI-generated art, which seems to have gone down all right, actually. I think most of our buddies...
It was very sensibly put, and it was all about the technology of why it works.
Yeah, thanks, man. That was what we were trying to do.
Without the
melodrama.
Yeah.
That's what we were very
valid
careful.
Which it isn't. But no, it was it was a very balanced presentation of this is what it really is, as opposed to what people think.
We can only defeat something if we know what it's like, and we know what it's about, don't we? I think is the way I look at it. Know your enemy, in a way.
It's here to stay. So
yeah,
it's about how these tools get used in the right way for the right purposes.
Yep, agreed, man. Yeah, agreed. Cool. So we shall have a chat in a second about our next one. And for the moment, man, I'll say goodbye. Thanks for that, dude. Much appreciated.
Cheers.